Hi, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Beyond the Mandate, Unifying Provider Data to Unlock Care Coordination and Compliance, presented by Verado and Fierce Healthcare. I'm Irina Lowell, content lead here at Fierce Healthcare, and I'll be hosting this webinar. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping notes that I want to get through. Additional resources are available in the handouts window. If you close one of the windows and need to reopen, click the name in the top navigation bar. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours. To learn more about our speakers, head over to the speaker bio window. And finally, there will be a short Q&A session at the end. If you have any questions for our speakers, you can enter them at any time throughout the webinar in the Submit Questions window. Now, I'd love to introduce our speakers. One, we have Pankuri Sharma, Strategy and Operations Leader at Humana. James Salava, Medical Director of Clinical Informatics at Allegheny Health Network. Martin Hogard, General Manager for Emerging Markets at Verado. And our moderator, Emily Kagan, former Senior Vice President and Chief Consumer Digital Solutions at Northwell Health. Emily, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Irina. And thank you all for making the time out in your day to come and have a conversation with us here today. This is an issue that's very near and dear to my heart. Provider data is so foundational to so many things that happen in healthcare. Referrals, analytics, access, patient experience, member experience, and yet for some reason this is still a really hard problem to solve. So we're going to dig into it today, and I want to start by maybe just setting the context here. So Pankuri, could you start off with us from a payer perspective? What does this provider data fragmentation look like? How does it show up in your organization?
Thanks, Emily. I would just emphasize on some of the things that you said. So when it comes to provider data, it is not something which is a work stream on its own and needs to just sit siloed in an organization. It is one of the key components of so many things and so many functions that a payer organization does. And like you mentioned, to start with, network adequacy and accuracy issue is the key one. So when the provider rosters or panels or any, say, geolocation data is not updated, that not only results in compliance exposure, but also delaying care for our members. It also erodes trust for the members whom, let's say, we are sending to a provider which does not have capacity or is out of network. The other area, a key area I would like to talk about, is claim payments. So when there is mismatch between provider data sitting in different parts of the organization, say contracting and then credentialing and claims payment, and that mismatch leads to a lot of claim pens, a lot of rework, and it overall amounts to operational inefficiencies. And then finally, the analytics piece that you briefly touched upon, especially in today's context when there is so much excitement about not only predictive analytics, in which I feel payer organizations have made a stride, but also Gen AI. We cannot expect these models to give us valuable insights if the data that gets fed into them is not accurate. And provider data is that connective tissue that binds all of these things.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great point about the AI, right? It's the garbage in, garbage out problem, and yet, for such a critical resource across so many areas, like you said, it is that super glue. This still seems to be something that trips us up. Now, from a provider perspective, James, could you tell us a little bit about how this shows up for you all operationally, and what are some of those impacts, those downstream impacts you're seeing?
Yeah, hi. So thank you for having me. Just a little bit about me real fast. My name is James. I am a primary care provider. I am internal medicine trained, and I've been in practice for about 17 years. I still see patients 2 days a week, but I do clinical informatics 3 days a week, and I'm the medical director here at Allegheny Health Network. So all of my perspective for you guys today is going to be from the clinical side. And so, this issue of provider data can be a real challenge. First of all, with referrals. So, when we're in the office and we're placing a referral, sometimes I'm in the system and I'm looking to send a patient to a specific provider. Sometimes that provider's information doesn't actually show up in my EHR. So it makes it very challenging for me to get that patient to the provider that I want to get them to. The next issue that you may have when you're sending patients is if that provider is managing their referral through a work queue, if the information is not correct, then managing that work queue and having those people who are managing it get that patient in with that specialist is also very, very difficult. And then there's the challenge of getting the information back from those referring specialists. So sometimes I don't get the letters back. Sometimes that could be related to culture. It doesn't seem like anymore we get quite as many letters as we used to back in the day. But some of that may just be because of mismatched data and it doesn't flow back the way it should. So that all can be a significant challenge. And then it does put a burden on staff. So I will have to ask my staff to track down all of this information, track down these letters from specialists. Sometimes that's done by like a health coach or a nurse or somebody who's doing my pre-visit planning for me in the office. Hopefully they're reaching out to those specialists, collecting that information, getting it in the system when I need it. But a lot of times I have to ask for it, right during the visit. And sometimes we have to wait, in the room with the patient until we get that information. And then, there are also significant challenges with results. We all are parts of different health systems many times. And so the patients are seeing different providers in different health systems, different hospitals that are all on different EHRs. And then there could be independent providers. And they could get tests and labs done at any of these different locations because patients don't always stay in the network that you want them to stay in. The patients go to whatever location's most convenient for them or closest to their house. And if you're not on the same EMR with that particular facility that's either doing that lab test or doing that imaging, it could significantly delay those results getting back to you. And many times we're still relying on faxes. We got to wait for that fax to come in, then we have to scan it into our EMR and then present it to the providers to review. And so there's a lot of manual effort. It leaves a lot of room for error and certainly delays. And then, sometimes this can result in recurrent testing or duplicate testing because I don't have the results that I think I should have that I ordered, but maybe didn't come in yet. So I'm ordering it again. So that can increase costs. And it just makes care coordination more of an effort. And then, it requires staff to be checking all of this stuff and trying to gather all this information. So there is there is a bit of burden that administrative burden that sort of rolls down to the staff because they're trying to find all of this information, and it's not very efficient. Patients are less satisfied when you don't have their data, and it really takes away from patient care when you're having to track all this stuff down.
Yeah, I mean, I can hear some of the frustration in your voice there, just the administrative headache that this can be. Do you sense that it's impacting your patients well, that they're also getting frustrated when they don't have this information working as smoothly together as it should?
Yeah, it's really interesting because everybody's on a computer. You have a computer at every single location, and because of that, patients think that all those computers talk to each other. And you say, well, did you see this specialist or did you get this lab done? And they'll say, yeah, it's in the computer. Well, no, we're not on the same computer system. But patients don't really realize that. So, and you have to take the time to explain it to them. And, they always say, well, they should have sent it to you. Well, it didn't always happen. So that's when, we're taking all these extra steps to try and find that information and get it. Hopefully we do it, in real time while the patient's there, and we can make that, we can use that information that we get in real time to make that decision. But sometimes we have to wait till after the patient's gone before we can actually get that information.
Yeah, it's not a great experience and certainly doesn't instill a lot of trust if you don't have all of your systems working as smoothly as you'd expect. Pankari, on the member side of things, do you hear from your members that this is an issue that ultimately ends up impacting them too?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that, and I can even speak about my experience as a member. I think this happened last year. I had to get some preventative tests done that my PCP recommended them to me. So this is something which is not part of my urgent care. This is something me taking time out of my daily life to go and do, and which in my head I don't need to do at all. And my pair provided me a directory of the providers, and a couple of providers that I called were out of network. They were no longer part of my peer network. So that just increased that level of effort as well as lag that I ended up doing those preventative tests 3 months after when I should have gotten them done. Now, as we are thinking about movement to value-based care, of which like preventative uh, care is a very integral pillar of. We cannot make that happen. We cannot expect members to bring about that behavior change when we are not ready to help them out when they need us. So it definitely, and this is of course an example of when the member, in this case me, did not need an immediate care delivery. So this was fine. But there are, of course, cases when a member does need to go to their PCP or orthopedic surgeon or cardiologist, and these kind of delays do erode their trust and their interest in the process.
Yeah, absolutely, and delays care ultimately if it really just makes it that much harder to get where you need to go. So Martin, you're hearing from the provider side, you're hearing from the payer side. You spent a lot of time working with both of these kinds of organizations. What are you seeing? Why is this such a challenge? What are some of those common themes that you're hearing as you work with these various kinds of organizations?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Emily, and it's great to be here with you all, and Pankari and James. My name is Martin Hogard. I'm the General Manager for Emerging Markets at Verato. To answer your question around kind of provider data fragmentation, especially across this payer and provider ecosystem, we're really seeing the same issue play out, even in some of these, acute stories. Provider data is everywhere, say in EHRs, CRMs, credentialing platforms, and claim systems. But nowhere is the provider data really consistent or trusted. So as we heard in some of these stories, what we see is that the fragmentation drives poor experience, and the second theme we're seeing is limited growth and inefficiency. So with PDM or provider data management, here at Verato, we look to reframe this from a compliance problem to more of a strategic data foundation, unifying data across this ecosystem. So at Verato, everything we do really centers around solving the problem that drives everything else, knowing who is who. And we look to help all these health systems and payers unify, enrich, and continuously synchronize that data across every system. And the impact of solving the identity problem is better experiences, smarter growth, and really to improve productivity, even through faster onboarding.
So if it's so critical, it's in so many systems, it's needed everywhere in an accurate way, I can't help but wondering, why are there still bottlenecks, right? Where are we getting ourselves tripped up? And you used the phrase PDM, provider data management, right? You would think that, okay, all of these systems are managing their provider data. So let's maybe dig in there a little bit. Maybe Pankari and James, you could take a moment and just tell us a little bit, why hasn't this been solved yet, right? Like, what are the operational bottlenecks to actually getting these data coordinated and managed? Go ahead, Pankari, go ahead.
You want to go first? Go ahead.
Yeah. Um, I would say, first of all, I would say there is definitely definitely a recognition of the fact that this is an issue, and all the organizations, colleagues across different payer organizations, as well as payers that I speak to, there is cognizance of this problem, and I would say that the industry is moving towards looking at this as a strategic priority versus just as a compliance issue. Having said that, the progress is not as fast as we would want it to be. And to answer your question, Emily, where the operational bottlenecks are, I would say it's like for any enterprise, issue, it's part platform issue, part process, part people. So for platform, like Martin said, we are still using systems which are outdated, a bit of legacy systems, which require manual work, which might require rework. They are not as automated as one would want them to be. And many a times they're not speaking to each other. So let's say there is, at a pair organization, there is a contracting team, which is different than a credentialing team, which is different than the claims team. And all of this data exists, but it sits in silos and it's not talking to each other. And then there is this overlap and sort of redundant mismatch. So there is platform issue. In terms of process, the issue is, again, like these teams are siloed as well. So let's say the checklist for verifying a provider information for the contracting team is different from than that of the credentialing team. So the standard workflows and like that unified team process is still lacking. And having said that, I would also say there is a lot of data that keeps getting updated. Like, we are talking about data that is very dynamic, and we are not talking about something that is something that providers get in one go, and they are not working on that. So it's something that the processes need to be very automated and dynamic as well. And I think that's where the peer organizations might not have reached at the optimal level yet. And then the third part is the people issue, which is that I believe not only for provider data, but even for all other types of data, there needs to be data stewardship. There needs to be data governance models, which oversee different processes, different platforms, how these teams come together, and then have the data quality metrics and just see whether an organization is tracking towards that or not. So overall, just to summarize, I feel there is progress, but these are some lags, given we are working on systems, on processes, which served us well before, but we haven't updated them at the speed at which we should update them. And that's why these bottlenecks still persist.
Yeah, I like that platform, process, people framework. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, this sounds like an interop problem. James, when you're hearing sort of people, process, platform, trifecta here, is that showing up for you guys too?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that I think that both my colleagues said it very, very well. They did a great job. So, I think that it's a silo issue, and I do think that there are a lot of these, legacy systems or these disparate systems that have difficulty talking to each other. And I do think that the solution is this master data management system that can talk to all of them and be the source of truth. And I do think that we're making progress. I think that it's slow, and some organizations are more advanced than others, but I think that we're moving in the right direction.
And I'm curious on the people piece, on the governance piece. Is that something that you've had to work on sort of separate to make sure that all of those data elements can come together and that people are collaborating? I'm just curious how much the people piece needs to be unique to solving this provider data challenge.
Yeah, and I do think I think most places do that well. I think most organizations have a good data governance program in place, making sure that people understand who owns what pieces of data, what they're responsible for, and making sure that they're using it responsibly.
So it sounds like we've got maybe some systems and practices that people can lean on already in place.
I believe most places do, yes.
Yeah. I know one of the places that, at least for me as a patient, and then also when I was at Northwell, that took up a lot of time was these provider directories, right? The Find a Doc tools of the world. It's just as you said, it's dynamic data. It's hard to keep them up to date. It's a massive challenge. What are you all doing? Let's go back to Pankuri at Humana to try and keep these systems up to date, and are you leveraging any new technologies, any more modern data approaches, automation, et cetera?
Yeah, we try, we have systems in place and we just try to understand where different data sits. Humana is a huge organization with, members who are in, the volume is in thousands. And of course, there is a lot of turnover based on contract negotiations and what our member needs are. So the idea is to use the solutions that talk to each other and bring together the disparate data which sits in different silos, and also using automation to the extent we can with the human oversight, just to make sure that the data stays cleaner, we can reduce the rework. Right now it's just, we have so much legacy and we know where we want to move forward, and it's about bridging that gap and seeing what are the best solutions to help us make that happen.
And I know one of the legacy issues is that there's payers on one side and providers on the other, but we're all looking at the same data, right? I mean, we're all looking at the same physician population. Are either of you seeing ways in which payers and providers can collaborate a bit more to make sure that where patients are going to look for this information, it's there, it's accurate, it's functional? I'm curious if there's new ways of approaching it just in terms of collaboration.
I would say, and I'll be curious to hear James' thoughts on this, is once the payer organizations and provider organizations, they have the internal alignment on what data they need. And then instead of, let's say, asking a payer to fill out that information, many a times, for different teams in the payer organization, once they have that internal alignment and then communicating it to the provider, or vice versa, like the flow of process could be from the other direction, it would be easier from both sides to understand what the expectations are, what the systems are, what all you need to update. And that would require less iterations that are going on right now.
Yeah, so I agree. I guess I would have to say that I'm at somewhat of an advantage over other health systems. Allegheny Health Network, where I work, we're based in Pittsburgh. We cover Western Pennsylvania, but our parent company is Highmark, which is an insurance company. So we're very closely integrated with that company, and the data flows back and forth seamlessly. So when we are looking for that information, when patients are looking for that information, it is much more accessible. And I do think it's important that all of that information about the providers and where they can find care is patient facing and easily accessible, so they can get to the right place at the right time. But I think we do that very well here.
That's great. That's great. When we think about solving these problems, I've heard you both talk about not just getting it to a place where it's good data, but where it's strategic data, right? Where it's something that we can actually turn into an opportunity for growth, for better functioning, et cetera. What is it about provider data that has you most excited about it as a strategic opportunity? James, why don't we go back to you?
Well, yeah. So, the first thing is I think it's good for patient care, and so when it's good for patient care, and the patients are satisfied, the patient will take care of the business, and that is overall good for business. I think it creates a great patient satisfier. It's a great patient experience. So I think that is incredibly strategic. I think that's of utmost importance. I also think that there's a lot of opportunities in the world of value-based care making sure, and I think somebody already touched upon this, but making sure these providers are correctly attributed, or the patients are correctly attributed to the appropriate provider. And it allows for better preventative care, care gap closures, performance scores, all of those types of things. And all of that is tied to reimbursement. So I think that those are tremendous opportunities. Again, I think some do better than others. I think we have a significant advantage here.
Yeah, that's great. Pankaj, is that similar for you at Humana, or are you seeing other kinds of strategic opportunities?
I would say it's pretty much similar. If I have to put it under a broad umbrella term, that would be value-based care. So that ranges from improving the member experience, making sure they get care on the right time, get the appropriate care, like James mentioned, gap closure. Also, as we're thinking about network optimization, which is becomes again an integral pillar for achieving value-based care. Just understanding whether there is network accuracy, adequacy, understanding which providers are able to perform on which metrics, and making sure that our members have that kind of transparency when they are choosing the providers. So none of these things can happen before, we have like you said in the beginning, Emily, like garbage in, garbage out. So if we don't have the right data to feed into these systems, we wouldn't be able to have those insights.
Right. And ultimately, some of that gets down to a speed to value question, right? The sooner you can get those data clean, the sooner you actually can start to recognize some of the benefits of doing that value-based care. Martin, where else are you guys seeing, as you work with various different clients, agility, improved contracting, other really powerful strategic levers that organizations are pulling once they've got these data where they need to be?
Yeah, I feel like we've already heard some great examples, but maybe I'll just share two additional ones. So we work with a health system where they use Verado PDM to standardize the provider data across all their different systems, and that reduced credentialing delays by more than 25%. And that's a critical improvement when you're looking at onboarding delays costing around maybe even $10,000 a day per provider. Another example is Baptist Health, where we synchronize provider data across Epic and patient portals, and that eliminated misrouted referrals. We've heard that example, as well as accelerated onboarding for the providers. So what we really see with kind of a unified PDM, provider data management, it enables three key benefits. So faster provider contracting and credentialing, reliable attribution for value-based care, as well as accurate network analytics. And you spoke about agility. That agility really becomes the competitive edge, where data is no longer a drag and is really a growth driver, and that speed to value.
So when you think about future goals, when you think about taking advantage of that network optimization or better value-based care, where do you all see this playing in the future, right? For organizations who do manage to get this muscle strengthened and built inside of their organizations? More of a question of the art of the possible here. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I would say, the organizations which would be able to make this a strategic priority and understand the potential that accurate and timely provider data can have, and then the applications of that, those organizations would be, ahead of the ones that won't do that. It's about, when we think about data, we talked about dynamic data, but one of the other things with data is we learn every year, and especially in this day and age, we learn every year what could the potential applications be. And for that, we need data in different formats. And then there are like, one field of the data, which is additional than what the kind of data that we needed last time when we were not using it, let's say, for an AI application. So this is all to say, first, just having the infrastructure, like that master resource that we talked about where data sits at one place, that is important. And then on top of that, the place where we are able to add more layers of data as needed in an agile way, that would help us use this in a reliable manner and get the insights or get the care that we intend to provide to our patients.
So it's not just clean data, it's enriched data, really.
It's enriched data, yes, because let's say we have provider data. Based on that, we did some analytics, or we need some more data from provider that we were not using or did not need for contracting purposes initially. But now we need it because it would help us for network optimization. So there is this like new, say 4 more columns of data that would be required going forward. How do we make sure that the old data that we already had from the providers, conjoins well with the new data that is coming? Because it's not just about things, it's dynamic, like that's an umbrella term, but this data is dynamic also in many fronts, and its use cases changes based on the new applications that are coming in every day. So just to answer your question, I'm like the art of the possible, as we are also excited about AI and analytics and things like that, we would have to also start thinking on our feet in terms of how do we get to accurate data in a timely way, and also leave the room for additional data to come in and speak to the existing data in an accurate manner.
When we're talking about the enriched data, I'm wondering, James, how much do you think there's an opportunity for enriching data to better help with referrals or better help patients figure out who these clinicians are that might be best suited to take care of them?
Yeah, I always think there's room for better data and better transmitting that information to the patients. I love the idea of having that information right at the fingertips of clinicians so they can make a better decision, and also at the fingertips of the patients so they have a good idea as to what provider they need to be seeing, and being able to give that information to them and have greater transparency so they can make more informed decisions. I think that is I think that's important. I think that that is happening. And I think that it helps to guide better decision making.
Great. I want to think a little bit more about what it takes to make this a strategic priority. I heard you mention that before, right? That this needs to become a strategic priority for people in the organization. When you are making the case for this to become something that's important, that is paid attention to, have either of you run into any struggles in helping others in the organization understand just why this is so important?
I don't know that it's struggles. I think that everybody understands the importance of having the data, having it available, making sure that it's good data, making sure that it's clean. I think that some organizations can be very large, very slow to change, very complex. They need things to move forward, and that doesn't always happen overnight. And so I think that sometimes that can really slow things down. I think that everybody wants to get there, and they just need to plan accordingly and move their organization forward. And I think that they'll see benefits. I think they understand that the benefits are there. It can just sometimes be a slow process.
Yeah. Is that something that you're also seeing, and maybe even Martin weigh in? Are you hearing any resistance, any hesitancy inside of organizations to taking on this data management?
I agree with James. I don't think there is any question about whether this should be it's the right thing to do or not. But when the organizations are complex and there are competing priorities, it just becomes a matter of speed and things are moving in the right direction at a slower speed than we would like. But it's less about convincing someone to do something that they might not want to do.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add, I mean, this is a really hard problem, right, to solve. So maybe that's some of the resistance that, oh, I've tried to do that before, I've dealt with this. And I've, you know, provider data management, some of the traditional players have dealt with different aspects of kind of the issues that we've talked about. And it's, you know, it's a lengthy process. It might take, you know, many months or even years to actually get this right. But now we're moving into kind of a modernized way of dealing with PDM, and where we can start to implement in weeks, right? So it's also trying to change that mindset of, I've dealt with this many times before. It's been really gnarly, to a time where, hey, there are new ways, new platforms that are cloud native that can plug in with existing, you know, healthcare connectors. That's really important to modernize this ecosystem.
Got it. And those tools are AI based? Are they more, you know, older technologies? I mean, what are we talking about that modern provider data management platform had that maybe we didn't have when we were trying to do this the hard way?
Yeah, it is exactly all of those, where it's more cloud-based, where you don't have to install a server to kind of make that available. Also, pre-configured data models where perhaps you don't have to think through what are the different fields and how do I want to structure each of the records, but where like within the offering we provide, we really have that out of the box. Another part is just the connectors into the ecosystem, right? And so having some of those pre-built connectors into the various different systems in the ecosystem is critically important. And then just a solid kind of support, right? Like making sure the customers are successful, so providing the right level of support to meet kind of these challenges where they are.
When we are talking about our own individual organizations, I know that there's a lot of progress that I've heard you both, all three make, whether it's your own organization, whether it's for the product that you're bringing forth. If I were to ask you, what are the three things that if we were sitting here a year from now, you hope you could speak differently about? What are three things that you would say, you know what, in a year from now, I really hope I could see this, that, and the other thing, and be able to sit here in this conversation and tell you about it?
It's a very difficult question, I would say, because you know, like Martin mentioned many a times, it's about, like, you know, the transitioning phases, and for all these processes are so long. But if I had a magic ball, I would say we would definitely. I would say across payer organizations, we should see more solutions being implemented than they are being right now, because we don't need to do this the hard way. Now, this is not considered an occupational hazard, which it was at one point of time. With the advent of all these, like Martin mentioned, cloud-based solutions and the new AI solutions, one can see that this doesn't need to be the way it has been, and we can change it. And I think that mindset change gives more enthusiasm to people to look into solutions and implement them, both at payers and the providers.
Got it. So better solutions, better mindset around all of this, and really sort of modernizing just the stance we're taking towards some of these data. James?
Yeah, well, three things, that's tough. But one thing, definitely, you know, I would love to see much greater data sharing and data exchange and interoperability. I don't want providers to have to wait for the information that they need to make a decision. I don't want patients to have to wait to get their results. I would love to be able to get rid of my fax machine. but it's I don't think it's going anywhere just yet. But hopefully one day, could you imagine a day where we don't have fax machines anymore because all of the data, moves back and forth. We get the results, we get the information, we get the referrals, we get all of that stuff that we need. But that would be a big wish for a year from now.
Yeah, much more data exchange, much more data sharing, and no more fax
I would love
machines.
it if it was all just in the electronic medical record where we need it when we need it, and in our provider database when we need it and don't have to go searching for it. I think it would be much more efficient. It would save so much time.
Yeah. And in 2026, let us all hope we can get rid of our fax machines.
It would be unbelievable.
Martin, from your perspective, you're working with these organizations. A year from now, what do you hope you're seeing there?
Yeah, and I have hope that we can get rid of the fax machine. Hopefully you got rid of the pager. So hopefully the fax machine is next. I think maybe just echo, what's been said, where we're really moving from reactive compliance to more proactive intelligence, where data is managed as maybe a living asset that's very dynamic. We've heard that too today, and where we can get strategic value from it and less of a regulatory checkbox. I think the other piece, is really to see that data exchange between payers and providers and even other ecosystems where we're sharing that common source of truth. The trusted provider identity is not only shared internally. There's a lot of challenges that we have to solve there, but also across systems to the different parties, so we can eliminate some of this data inefficiency and inconsistency. We've actually built that future into a platform, and we call it the Verado Identity Network. But if we get all of this right, provider data will stop being the problem behind operational issues that we've talked today about, and really start being the foundation for everything from interoperability to value-based care. And at that point, we'll have better data, better decisions, and better care.
I like what you said there about managing data as a living asset, because ultimately, these data are describing living clinicians, right, who get new training, who work at different organizations, and it really is dynamic, as we've been talking about. I saw a question come in from the audience, and I just want to remind everybody, take the opportunity, go to that Q&A box and type in a question if one comes up. But there was a really good question here, I think, that touched on that, which was about struggling to get operational leaders to understand the nuances of provider data, while also having your analysts and engineers understand provider data lifecycle, right? How are these changes coming in? Who's approving them? How often are these updates being made? And what's the nature of the update? How do you bridge that gap to improve data quality and decision-making? And the question was, what methodologies or approaches have your teams employed to help align these groups and build shared understanding?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I completely agree that there is, especially in larger organizations where there's so many people who are working on provider data, they're sitting across different teams, have different roles altogether. They might not understand what's the importance of what they're doing, beyond just doing great work with cleaning the data or updating the data. And this is where I would, go back to the people's part of the process that we talked about, that explaining use cases to different folks, because the person who's sitting and doing provider credentialing that team might be very different from the team who is looking into analytics and doing figuring out insights based on network optimization. These two teams don't necessarily talk to each other, and these are very different scope of works. But if we have that kind of umbrella entity which can take care of data use cases, then even if these are teams are not talking to each other, they have at least a slide or whichever way they can understand, hey, these are different use cases. What you do feeds into XYZ, and this is the output that comes out of it. So I would say just aligning people on where all their work goes to, what all it impacts, and just getting everybody on the same page is at least a great beginning point for this issue.
And have you been able to make some of these use case stories to share and to sort of spread the word about?
Yeah. And that's how I would say all organizations work, and all kinds of, when you're trying to bring people on the same page, and it's not just about the provider data management. You have to create that kind of, for the lack of a better phrase, communication piece, and making sure that across larger organizations, people can come together and see the broader vision behind some of the tactical tasks or processes that we have.
Okay. What about on the provider side? What are some of the processes or systems that you've had?
Yeah, I think that having good data governance, having a good data governance, committee, if you want to call it that has a bird's eye view of all of these different systems and requests and new technologies, what have you, that can oversee all of this, that can make decisions, and that can update and explain this to people, I think is critical. And I think that most places have that, or at least I like to believe. But I think that the data governance for these types of systems is critical.
And has that data governance body been the one that really articulates and helps the organization understand the importance of that work? I'm noticing another question in here. It's very time intensive to do the data mapping and to take care of the quality on an ongoing basis, do that data hygiene work. So when you're looking at those competing demands, right, what are those arguments that really make the case to get this to be a priority? And where are those arguments coming from in your organization? Who's pushing?
I think they come from everywhere. I think that it's up to your data governance body to be able to weigh the benefits of all of those different requests and the different things that are coming in with that whole the entire picture of the entire organization to be able to make those decisions.
And do you similarly find it coming just from everywhere? Like you just hear this chorus?
Right. It would be depending on the team which needs the data, they would make their case. And of course, there needs to be a centralized body, like James mentioned, which would have to take those into account. And then I feel that at the organizational level, that body should have enough autonomy, budget, resources to move forward with the changes that they need to execute after they have strategically compared different options and determine their priorities.
Yeah, I think that's really key there, what you said about making sure that body then is empowered to make those changes. I'm seeing some questions here about data ownership. What are some of the elements, another question here, what are some of the key elements that make data governance truly impactful? Like what are the things, clearly having the authority to work with the various data owners, but what are some of the other elements you've seen that have made your approach to data governance impactful?
I would say, firstly, the goals of the data governance committee, how they connect to the enterprise goals. Like what is the enterprise at the higher level trying to achieve for a given year or say in the next 5 years? Just making that compelling narrative of how this governance committee's goals would align to that would just make persuading the right members easier than not. Then, as we talked about, resources, and then overall visibility that James touched upon across different teams to see that such an organization exists. This is what falls under their purview, and these are the things that we can get done. All of those things just like empower the committee to do their job in an optimal manner.
And go ahead, James. Sorry.
No, I think that's right on. I think that making sure that you're aligned with your organizational objectives when you're leading these types of bodies is spot on. It was well said.
And does that responsibility also get back to the individual data owners, right? I think that's another question that I'm seeing here. Who owns these data, right? If the profile is an amalgamation of data maintained and managed by various different groups, getting them to come together. I see you shaking your head. It sounds like you've been there.
I mean, I see the question like who owns the data, the patient, the payer, or the health system, and I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I guess it depends on who you ask, right? I think that's probably an ethical question, yeah, I don't have a great answer for that. Should it be the patient? Well, probably, but is it all the time? I don't know that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add to James's response. Like it also depends, right? There are different aspects of this golden record, if you will, and different systems or different use cases or different business outcomes kind of want to contribute or understand that part of the record. So I think there's also, it's not just one thing where I own it or you own this other records. There might be different parts of the record that could be governed by different people. And so that's also important for the platform that you choose to kind of create that master where they enable that governance, complex governance structure, as well as aggregating that golden record and kind of sending it to the downstream systems as well.
Right, that goes back to that trust, right? If I don't trust that the data I'm going to get back from this golden record is as good as what I was maintaining, well, then I'm not gonna cooperate. I'm not gonna play. But that golden record does need to be the most trusted source, updated from the various streams, and then trusted enough to come back into my CRM, into my EHR, into my credentialing system, and populate what it needs to populate.
That's right. Yep.
I see a question in here about graph technologies and looking at relational models. I know this is one of the things that I was previously working on that I was really interested in is the relationships inside of provider networks. Have either of you in your organizations looked at applying any of these graph technologies of relational models to get a better understanding of how folks within your provider networks are interacting?
I could say that I have not personally, but that's not to say that someone else in my organization has not. It's just I have not. But I'm certain that somewhere here somebody's looking at it.
Does some of this insight come into play when you're looking at that strategic network growth, right? And trying to understand opportunity spaces? Just curious if you guys have sort of put this into play to start to look not just at the individual physician data, but the body itself, right? And what it does and doesn't say about the population of care that it represents.
Yeah, I think it's helpful in guiding those decisions when you're trying to figure out where to put providers or where you need where your gaps exist. So I certainly think it is helpful to be able to see that.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that as well, James, where we're using kind of this mapping of provider location and organization, maybe even patient relationships, to see where there are referral patterns and affiliation with different care networks, which some other relational models often miss. But if you kind of see that even on a real geographical map, you can start to see some of those gaps in your network, perhaps.
We didn't really touch on it that much, but because you mentioned location, right? Is that another element that you think is critical to managing within the context of provider data management? I'm curious if your organizations also look at that sort of provider to location data relationship, or if it's really just sort of the provider as the individual and locations are managed separately.
I would would say it plays an important part. And two of the use cases that I can think of are firstly like network adequacy. So just if we, as we're thinking about contracting providers, just knowing whether there are, enough number of providers with a required panel in a given area, location plays a part there. And also then as we're thinking about sending members to, many a times, members look into provider directories based on where they are geographically located and what's available in 5 miles of distance and whatnot. So that's where location also plays a part, vis-a-vis member care and experience.
Yeah, I think it helps make strategic decisions. Like if where are the gaps in primary care, what locations, what do you need, what providers do you need to add? And then also what specialists do you have and where? And how long or how far a patient will need to travel to get to that provider. So I do think it's helpful in making those types of strategic decisions.
And so for both of you, your provider data management programs do put arms around the location piece as well?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, got it. And Martin, is that something that you're also just seeing, is that people talk about provider data management and we're already talking about location data management, or these feel like separate initiatives to you?
No, they are very much combined to a point where we're calling that the provider network intelligence. We talked a lot about provider, but it's truly the network intelligence. It takes into account all the different pieces, right? So the patient, the provider, the location as a network to really offer the best care for that patient population.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. I'll turn it back to the panelists real quick before handing it back over to Irina. Any final thoughts from anyone?
This has been great. Yeah, thanks for the conversation and engagement. Yeah, even from the audience. Thank you.
Yes,
yeah,
great
thank
question.
You for having us. It was fantastic talking to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to the audience.
Sorry, I was just saying it's also great to see where we are at the healthcare industry level. It seems like we all want to go in the same direction. We have similar problems, so it's a great confirmation. And though the problem isn't resolved, in its entirety, but it's heartening to be part of this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. First step is just talking about the issue, right? So I'm very, very grateful to all of our panelists today. Very, very grateful to the audience for some really excellent questions, and especially grateful to Irina and Fierce Health for helping put this together with Verato. So Irina, may I turn it back over to you for a wrap up?
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining. That concludes the end of this webinar. But as a reminder, a recording of this session will be available on demand within 24 hours. Thank you again to our speakers. Thank you, Emily, for moderating this really, really important discussion. And thank you all for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you again next time.